Big Shaw disguises himself as a homeless person to test the police. What happens next is crazy. The sun dipped behind the skyline, painting the city in hues of orange and gold. Tourists and locals poured into the bustling downtown park, weaving between street vendors and performers. No one paid much attention to the tall figure hunched on a bench by the fountain, head bowed beneath a ragged hooded sweatshirt. His oversized coat showed frayed edges, and his battered sneakers told a story of hard miles. He gripped a paper cup, occasionally rattling a few coins inside. Only a handful of people realized that beneath the shabby exterior stood NBA legend Shaquille O'Neal, known to fans as Big Shaq. The towering athlete, recognized worldwide for his dominance on the court, had decided on a daring social experiment to see firsthand how authorities treated those they perceived as powerless. Over the years, Shaq had encountered countless stories of profiling and prejudice. Now, he wanted to witness it personally, with no illusions or entourage protecting him. He arrived at the park by public bus, stepping onto the pavement unnoticed thanks to the transformation. Under a worn cap, he tucked away his distinctive features. Makeup and cleverly patched clothing completed the disguise. Despite his imposing height, passers-by tended to dismiss him as just another homeless man looking for spare change. For the first hour, Shaq sat quietly, observing joggers trotting past in bright athletic gear. Teenagers zipped around on skateboards. Families ambled by with strollers. Most ignored him. A few dropped coins into his cup. A mother shot him a sympathetic glance but hurried along, child in tow. Shaq nodded gratefully at the small acts of kindness. This wasn't about charity, though. He was waiting for the police presence that often patrolled the area. Sure enough, the black and white cruiser rolled into view just as dusk settled in. Two officers stepped out, Officer Davis, tall and confident, and Officer Lopez, with searching eyes that took in every detail. Davis led the way across the grass, scanning for any sign of trouble. When they spotted Shaq alone on the bench, they exchanged a quick glance. Slowly, they approached. Shaq felt his heartbeat quicken, though he kept his face impassive. He pretended not to notice them until the shadow of Officer Davis loomed across his feet. "You can't sleep here," Davis stated bluntly. "Parks are about to close in an hour." Shaq raised his eyes slightly. "I'm not sleeping," he replied in a low voice, playing the part. Officer Lopez, more cautious, spoke next. "Sir, do you have any ID? A place to go tonight?" Shaq shook his head. "No place yet, just resting." Davis's mouth tightened. "We've had complaints about loitering. We can't have transients making people uncomfortable." Lopez shot his partner a warning look but didn't correct him. Instead, she addressed Shaq in a calmer tone. "What's your name?" He offered, "Henry." Using a random alias, his voice husky and faint with fatigue. He rummaged in a torn pocket, producing a battered ID card made for the occasion, its name matching. The officers took it. Davis scanned it suspiciously. "This is pretty worn," he remarked. "Henry, are you from around here?" Shaq shrugged. "Used to be. Times got hard." Lopez handed back the card, clearly unsure if it was legit but lacking a reason to contest it. Davis snorted softly. "We've had issues with vagrants. People say they feel threatened. Maybe you should move along." Shaq stared at the ground, letting the tension hang. He considered whether to push back, but decided to let them lead the exchange. He offered a half-murmured, "Ain't bothering nobody." Davis's voice grew sharper. "Yeah, well, people pay good money to enjoy this park without worry. You're lying around with no purpose. That's an issue. We can't have you scaring families." An elderly bystander paused, watching. Shaq sensed her curiosity. A moment later, the woman mustered courage and spoke. "He's not scaring me, officer." She turned to Shaq. "You're just sitting." Before Shaq could answer, Davis dismissed her with a hand wave. "Ma'am, we appreciate your concern, but let us do our job." The woman frowned, then walked off, looking troubled. Lopez tried stepping in. "We can refer you to a shelter, Henry, or a meal program. Maybe that helps?" Shaq appreciated the gentler approach. "Sure," he said. "I'd be grateful for any info." Davis, however, showed no sign of relenting. "Let's run your name through the system," he said, flipping open the cruiser's laptop. "Just a routine check," he added, though his tone carried suspicion. Over the next 10 minutes, Shaq waited silently as they typed away. The longer the check took, the more impatient Davis grew. Each minute told him this: Henry had no active warrants, no reason to arrest him. But Davis pressed, seeking some rationale to escalate. Finally, with a quiet beep, the system confirmed no records. Shaq was clean. Davis clicked his tongue in annoyance while Lopez gave a small, relieved nod. She turned to Shaq. "No issues found. We can't force you to leave unless you're breaking a law, but we recommend you find a safer spot. Maybe a shelter. This park closes soon." Shaq nodded quietly, thanking them for the suggestion, but Davis wouldn't let it drop. "Look," he said, stepping closer, "I'm not comfortable leaving you here. People complained. Move on now." Shaq paused, heart pounding. Should he comply or test them further? Deciding to see how far Davis would push, he shook his head slightly. "I'm just resting a bit more," he said. Davis clenched his jaw. "Are you refusing an officer's instruction?" Lopez shot her partner a warning glare. "He's not breaking a law," she murmured. "We have no grounds to—" "We can't babysit him," Davis retorted, his voice rising. "If he won't leave on his own, we might have to remove him." Shaq lifted his gaze, letting a hint of steel show in his eyes. "For what crime?" Davis's hand drifted near his baton. "Disturbing the peace," he bluffed. "Loitering." Lopez, clearly uncomfortable, tried again. "Sir, please, for your own safety, it's best you find a shelter. Let's not create a scene." Shaq exhaled slowly. Part of him wanted to stand his ground, but another part remembered this was enough. He had tested them. One officer remained borderline aggressive, the other torn between empathy and duty. He decided not to risk an ugly confrontation. Rising to his full, imposing height, he slung his ragged bag over one shoulder. Davis took a half-step back, eyes widening at Shaq's size. For a moment, Shaq almost cracked a smile. He was used to overshadowing people, but not in this context. "All right," Shaq said, his voice low. "I'm leaving." Lopez gave a soft nod, relief evident in her eyes. "Be safe," she murmured. Davis merely scowled, stepping aside. Shaq trudged towards the park exit, feeling the burn of Davis's glare on his back. A few onlookers watched, uncertain who was in the right. The tension dissipated only when Shaq vanished around the corner. But the story wasn't done. Later that night, Shaq took to social media, revealing his experiment. He posted short footage captured from a hidden body cam under his coat. The clip showed how differently Davis and Lopez approached him. The younger officer tried to help, while the other escalated. The post read, "Testing real attitudes. Some good, some not. Time for change." Fans and followers erupted. They recognized him as Big Shaw, the beloved star. Many felt outraged at Davis's behavior, praising Lopez for her restraint. In the following days, local news picked up the story. Debate ignited about policing the homeless, the use of intimidation, and the blurred line between safeguarding public spaces and harassing vulnerable people. Shaq clarified he didn't want Davis fired. He wanted more training and better empathy. "People fear what they don't understand," he said in an interview, "but fear can't justify bullying those who seem powerless." As the dust settled, Shaq quietly arranged for a donation to homeless outreach programs in the city. He also sent an anonymous letter to Officer Lopez's precinct, praising her professionalism. Meanwhile, Davis faced scrutiny from his superiors. The department ordered additional training for all officers in that unit, focusing on respectful engagement with homeless individuals. Weeks after the incident, Shaq visited that same downtown park in his usual style, recognizable, wearing a stylish tracksuit, signing autographs. People flocked to greet him. Among them was Officer Lopez, shyly approaching. "I'm sorry about what happened," she said. "I tried to do right, but I felt stuck." Shaq gave her a gentle smile. "You did what you could. Maybe next time it'll be easier to do even more. Thanks for showing compassion." He also noted quietly that he bore no malice toward Davis, only hoping the officer would learn from this. That conversation ended with a handshake and a sense of mutual respect. Over time, the story shaped local discourse, leading to small but notable changes in department policy. The city council debated resource allocation, deciding to fund more specialized training. Community groups praised Shaq's unusual approach, though some questioned whether a sting operation was entirely fair. Shaq listened, acknowledging concerns while emphasizing that real-life change often required bold acts. Months passed. The park continued to host families, joggers, and travelers. Officer Davis, after mandatory training and reflection, patrolled with a more measured approach. One afternoon, he spotted a disheveled man on a bench. Remembering the fiasco, he paused, took a breath, and approached politely, offering resources instead of demands. He never admitted it publicly, but Davis felt a twinge of gratitude toward Big Shaq for forcing him to confront his bias. Sometimes a harsh lesson could lead to personal growth.